I have 9:31, so let us begin. John Gammey's recording, so we can have a wonderful reminiscence of this later on. I want to start with a prayer from Praying with the Earth, a prayer book for peace. John Philip Newell thought this was appropriate for today. Let us pray. For the freshness of this new day, thanks be to you, O God. For morning's gift of clarity, its light like the first day's dawn, thanks be to you. In this newborn light, let us see afresh. In this gateway onto what has never been before, let our soul breathe hope for the earth, for the creatures, for the human family. Let our soul breathe hope. Amen. Very fortunate today to have our own church member, Matt Gallagher. You fly under the radar, and I know that's a military term, but he has. You will have no idea how accomplished Matt is, and if you'd like, you can go to Wikipedia and get 5 pages worth of incredible information. I do want to just mention, he's a former U.S. Army captain. How many of you knew that? And he's a veteran of the Iraq War. He's written on a variety of subjects. He's mainly an author now, mainly for his contemporary both war fiction and nonfiction. He became first known for his memoir, Kaboom, in 2010, which tells of his and his scouts' platoon's experience during the Iraq War. And he has written or been interviewed for a variety of places, Vanity Fair, a latest article I think he will address, and I have copies here, and I sent out in the email. For Esquire magazine, he's taken 3 trips on behalf of Esquire magazine, and his latest article came out just on November 21st of this year, brand new. Also been seen on CBS News Sunday Morning, PBS NewsHour, BBC News, and NPR. So it's very impressive. He will share about his latest trip and other trips to Ukraine and talk about the war. And I couldn't blow it up any larger than this, but here's a map of Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Romania. There's the Crimea portion, and of course there's Russia. And he will talk about where he has visited within the country, because that geographically, I know, helps folks like me. So without ado, Matt Gallagher. Hey, Matt. Yay!
Morning, everyone. Thanks so much for bringing me in. I hope this is educational or interesting and worthy of your time. And if it's not, you can blame Todd and John. Todd, I can click on.
What do you need to do?
Pull up that presentation.
Okay. You don't need that. He is gone. Share the screen.
Perfect, thank you.
And when you hit play, I believe it will.
Perfect, thank you. So I put together a very rudimentary PowerPoint. It's got the basics up there. It'll help me kind of guide the conversation a little bit. I'll definitely save time for Q&A at the end, but if I'm saying something, and especially with the geography, feel free to just raise your hand and interrupt me. I don't mind. This is pretty informal, and I want it to be that way, more conversational for us all. As Todd mentioned, I've been to Ukraine 3 times. The first time happened right after the renewed Russian invasion in March 2022. I got a call from an old Army friend of mine, who's also a writer, Adrian Bondenberger, who is married to a Ukrainian woman, and he was going overseas to help pry his in-laws out of Kyiv. They didn't want to leave, but their daughter and Adrian's wife felt it very necessary to go over there and get them out. While they were there, they had a connection with the Lviv City Council. Lviv is a big western city in western Ukraine. It's kind of become a hub for humanitarian aid, weapons support coming in from the west. It's economically kind of in a better place than much of the country because of its, how close it is to the rest of Europe. They had a connection to the city council, and the city council was looking for some military veterans of Western nations who could maybe help and come train, not soldiers, but kind of everyday civilians, citizens like yourselves, who, if the Russian, at this time, we know now that the Russian invasion got turned back at the Battle of Kiev, and most of the war is being fought out east now. But at the time, it seemed like the Russians were going to be able to invade and occupy the whole country. And there was great interest of people just kind of learning how to maybe defend themselves. Maybe they'd never even picked up a gun before. But so he gave me a call, and I had about 48 hours to convince my wife that this was a worthwhile endeavor. I'm still not sure I've quite convinced her, but she did let me get on a plane. And I thought this might be a good introduction to that first trip and our work on the first trip that aired on CNN. Oh, I did that thing. I did that thing I wasn't supposed to.
You're not the only one. Stop the share. Stop it. Oh, let's skip that. Stop that. We're gonna keep it this size because to blow it up, we lose that speaker and it goes to the computer speaker. So, here we go.
Welcome back to our coverage from Lviv, Ukraine. You can hear air raid sirens are going off. It's the middle of the night here. This is at least the fourth time we've heard air raid sirens on this day alone. For the past few days, I've spent time with some American veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. 3 Americans who have come here on their own dime, wanting to help train volunteers so that they can fight alongside the city defense force if and when Lviv is attacked. In Lviv, men who've never fought now train for war. They practice clearing rooms in a stacked formation, using hand signals to move in silence. It's a 2-week crash course in combat, the bare essentials to stay alive.
So it looked really great.
As always, just get clear that doorway, right?
Matt Gallagher served in Iraq. Adrian Bonenberger did 2 tours in Afghanistan. Both American Army vets who've come here to help.
One person on the back.
Exactly right. You guys look good.
Okay, thanks.
Think about where you were 2 weeks ago.
Outside, Ben Bush prepares another group of volunteers. He served 2 tours in Iraq as a Marine.
There's a suspected patrol in the area of 1 or 2 people. We're not sure.
Ми очікуємо, що там може бути патруль противника, а чисельністю 1 або 2 особи.
Squad leader, any questions?
Як ми маємо попасти зараз в то здання?
Ben, Matt, and Adrian are not working for the U.S. military or government. They're not being paid by anyone. They bought their own tickets here and are doing this for free. What made you want to be here?
I came to this country for the first time in 2015. I fell in love with the country. I met my wife here, so it was a personal connection.
And our personal connection was to him and to the overall effort of a democracy fighting to be a democracy.
I kind of landed on an old line from For Whom the Bell Tolls. For what are we born if not to aid one another? And looking at my 2 young sons and thinking of that line, I just felt like this was a unique opportunity to help show them how to be the men and grown-up adults I aspire for them to be.
2 weeks ago, the volunteers they train had no idea how to clear a building or move as a unit. Most have never fired a gun before.
These are teachers, bus drivers,
Lawyers, welders.
who want to protect their neighborhoods, protect their homes, many of whom never thought they'd be in this position.
We've been doing everything we can to give them the tools that they need to survive because they're going to defend their city one way or another.
Some have modern rifles, but others train with antique ones, loaned by a local gun collector.
I think I saw, is it a Tommy gun? I mean, it had a...
That would be from the collection.
I mean, that's
Is that literally like a Tommy gun from the 1930s?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They've got Mausers, they've got some kind of weird machine gun I think I've seen in movies before.
All the new weapons are being sent to the front. This is what they have here now, and if the war comes here, that's arguably what they're gonna have to fight with.
And they're here every day dutifully, working as diligently as any Marines I've ever trained, and I've trained a lot. And they don't complain. They continue to move. They are at the point now, we've worked progressionally to make the leaders emerge, because leadership is going to be necessary for coordination for anything, and they have emerged. We now know that there's bone to this organization, and that gives me a great deal of confidence, because I'm not going to be here forever, and that's hard for me the closer I get to them.
We'll do it again differently later, right?
Зробимо ще раз це, але пізніше.
Always differently.
Завжди будемо робити це інакше.
Well done.
Добра робота.
The volunteers cover their faces for their own safety. They know what Russia is capable of, but they also want Vladimir Putin to know they are ready.
Я хочу, щоб русські знали, що в кожному будинку, в кожній квартирі, в кожній собачій будці ми будемо чинити опір. У нас буде партизанський рух, і ми будемо давати бій.
On the last day of the training course, volunteers get the chance to fire a weapon. They're given just 10 rounds for target practice. There's not enough ammo to spare.
Already on firing line. You're clear to fire.
They're practicing on AK-47s, but most of those volunteers haven't been issued AK-47s of their own. There's simply not enough of them to go around. They've had to buy whatever guns they can find on the open market, and even then, it's hard for them to find ammunition.
This 20-year-old volunteer says firing the AK-47 was something of a wake-up call.
So, but now, today, I just understand that there could be the person who wanna shoot me.
What do you think of the American guys who've come to help train?
They're really cool. They're maximum cool. Like
They're
really
maximum cool?
Yeah. I thank them that they came here and they're teaching us. I appreciate that a lot.
Ben, Adrian, and Matt hope when they leave, other combat veterans will come and continue their mission.
You don't have to come here as a combatant at all. You can come here and do this on a very basic level. And if you have a specialty, if you have an urge, this is how it's applied. It's not imaginary, it's not mythological. We're actually doing this, and you can see the effect.
This is what the Germans and French did for us when we were in a similar situation during the American Revolution. People came over and helped us train.
And just to remind Americans of all ideologies, all politics, however they feel about this war, these are everyday people who want the same things that you and I want back home, right? Peace, some prosperity, opportunity for a better life for their children.
Point out that Matt, Ben, and Adrian have left the country now. We wanted to wait until they were out of the country to show this story, show the work that they were doing here. But as they said, they hope other responsible vets will come here with a desire to help train those using whatever skills that they learned in combat.
Okay.
Press that phone.
There's one simple hearing hack anyone can use to improve their hearing almost
No more,
overnight.
Anderson.
I didn't follow our own rules. I didn't keep distance between the vehicles. I didn't follow the tire tracks, and I had 2 anti-personnel mines.
Okay, now back to yours presentation. I gotta reopen it completely.
Yeah, it's behind it, it looks like.
Where is it? Oh. And why is this in the way?
Perfect. Thanks, Todd. Let's see. how do I?
How do you forward it?
Yes. Oh, got it. Okay, so thought I'd just start with that since that kind of covers the basics, at least the first trip. You know, the kind of the background of that was Adrian really kind of had all the connections, gave us a call. We were the only ones, I don't know, dumb enough to answer it and get on the plane and meet him. But it really ended up kind of, I would, you know, for reasons we can get into later, really wasn't kind of sure what we were getting into, but it ended up kind of being a very fulfilling experience in a way that, at least personally, my own time in the military had not been, right? This was a very rare thing, I think, in the world. I mean, all this is my opinion. I'm very opinionated and all this is subjective, but I'm certainly not an expert on geopolitics, but helping everyday people learn how to defend themselves in the face of an imperial invasion seemed, you know, no war is good, but some wars are, in my opinion, necessary. And this seemed like one, and that's kind of why we showed up and went. Just kind of a background. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Where's the underwriting coming for this? Is it coming from the U.S. government? Is it coming from your pocket?
Yeah, we paid for it all. That was very important. Anderson Cooper, I think at first wanted to make sure we weren't CIA operatives and violating, you know, all kinds of international treaties and whatnot. And don't get me wrong, like any war, you're seeing some of that stuff over there. And in my subsequent trips as a journalist, and we can get, I'll get into that in a bit, of, you know, some kind of the nefarious forces, profit-making forces that have been attracted to Ukraine. You know, but Ben Bush, the rock star with the long hair, former Marine, who was really kind of our head trainer. He was a lieutenant colonel, so he spent the most time in the military of the three of us. As he pointed out, as we were leaving Ukraine, we were kind of seeing all these businessmen and just kind of strange forces coming in through Lviv. He looked at me, he goes, I think we were the only suckers dumb enough to come over here and lose money. And we did. So I'll talk, you know, very briefly about that first trip. Second trip, I went back last fall as a journalist. I spent about a month there, kind of bouncing all over the country to get a better feel for the war as a whole. That first trip, we really just kind of stayed here in Lviv. And then I returned again this past August as a journalist again. Both those trips, Ben was my photographer. So it was nice going over with a friend and a colleague that you trust and has, you know, seeing and experiencing the same things you are. Then I can talk briefly about some of my subjective takeaways, and I want to stress they're very subjective. And then turn it over to you all to answer any questions you all might have. Just some background so you know a bit about me. I graduated college in 2005. I was a freshman when 9/11 happened. I joined ROTC really as a way to pay for school. I wasn't, and am still not. You can probably tell a very kind of gung-ho G.I. Joe type. But I came from a military family. I wanted to serve. I didn't really know how. 9/11 changed the lives of all of us, and certainly the trajectory of mine. That's a picture of the future Mrs. Gallagher and me, the day I graduated. We were young kids way back when. I spent 15 months in Iraq as a scout platoon leader in 2007 and 2008, what we now call the Surge. It was a very formative time in my life, a very educational time. It was the first time really I was exposed to kind of that type of poverty. I grew up in the suburbs of Nevada. My parents are lawyers. Poverty in America is just different than a lot of parts of the world. And this picture here, the three soldiers, that's a trash dump that we call Trash Village, because religious exiles of some sects that had been banned by both the Shias and the Sunnis lived there, and were children there, living in a trash dump. And we'd been called there actually to investigate. Some helicopter pilots had seen a bunch of metal, and they were worried there was potential weapons cache. No, it was garbage. Yeah, it was garbage. It was these people were using it as their roofs and as shelter. You know, of course, over the course of 15 months, you know, we dealt with some firefights and roadside bombs, but all these years later, what I remember most is the people. Unlike kind of earlier in that war, we walked, you know, every day we walked amongst the Iraqi neighborhood, talking to them about electricity, trying to broker contracts with the sheiks. It was a very dark experience in my life, to be quite honest. I didn't come back from it feeling victorious, feeling great about my country. We'd done some good, I thought, but it seemed very temporary and mostly just trying to fix something that my country had messed up and destroyed. That said, you know, because this is a church school, I wanted to talk. A positive memory that I recall from that time was we'd been called out. We're just kind of doing random security checks because we almost never knew actually where the quote unquote enemy were, where the insurgents were, and a very poor rural farmer. I think it was a rice farmer. You know, we were searching his farmhouse and his fields, and I was just apologizing to him for kind of upending his day because it was going to take 4 to 6 hours. I knew he had better things to be going on, and you know, oftentimes the local Iraqis were very upset with you, and understandably so. But I remember he was very zen about it, and he's just kind of looked at me and goes, "Oh, it's fine. We're all people of the book." I go, you know, my faith at that time was not very strong, based on, you know, being young maybe, but also just kind of being over there perhaps. You know, it hadn't broken or anything, but it was being tested, and I kind of looked at him like, what do you mean? And he explained that his understanding of Islam, and we were stationed in an area that's the base that we all lived at in the middle of a sandstorm. He explained that his Islam was peaceful, and that Muhammad had charged them with protecting other people of the book, which included both Christians and Jews, and that he spoke very passionately about how much he hated the extremists in the area that had hijacked his religion. You know, it was just a normal person who had every reason to be upset with me personally, and certainly my 30 soldiers, sharing his kind of hard-earned wisdom and his understanding of the world. And it's something I've thought about ever since. You know, anytime I see my religion maybe being twisted for ends that it shouldn't be, and summoned for political purposes that it have no right to be utilizing it, right? That can happen in any religion, to any people in any country. And anytime I get too down about the world or those 15 months, I try to remember that farmer. While I was there, I kept a blog that I didn't think anybody was reading, other than my family. They were, and about 6 months in, I made fun of my battalion commander. Turned out he was reading too, so that got shut down. But that was, it did kind of jumpstart my writing career. And you know, some people wanted it to be kind of this big First Amendment thing, and well, I appreciated the passionate readers that felt that way. Like I've always felt that I was in uniform. You know, I joined up to protect those rights, not necessarily to get to abide by them. But you know, it was I was never really an intentional rogue, always just kind of an accidental one, and that experience was that.
Welcome to the USA.
Yes, exactly right. Welcome to Presbyterianism, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you know, that's just kind of a bit of background about who I am, my worldview, and some of the experiences that shaped me. Flash forward 14 years, my family and I had moved to Tulsa as part of the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. We'd really only been here about 4 or 5 months. I was actually planning on not writing about, I was so sick of writing about war. It's a very dark subject. I was starting to write more about sports and feeling better about life. You know, a young father, like feeling good, like, okay, I've compartmentalized everything. And then Adrian called me and said, would you be willing and able to come out and do this? I found, you know, you really kind of already got the gist of that first trip from the CNN piece, but I really just kind of fell in love with Lviv. You know, I just a spot on the map to me before. I'd never been to it before, but it's this really fascinating cross section of East and Central Europe, where all these different forces and histories and cultures kind of meet you know, different times it was under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was under Poland, it was under the Soviet Union, you know, it's now part of Ukraine. It's just really kind of this melting pot with this dark layered history that I think is sometimes really hard for us as Americans to understand and grapple with. You know, talking to Ukrainian friends on these various trips about, you know, kind of their cultural memory of World War II, for example, is very, very interesting, very different than what we learn as Americans, right? I mean, this is an area that was, you know, really square between Soviet Empire and Nazi Germany, and for a lot of Western Ukrainians in particular, the Nazis treated them better, right? They brought order in a way. Not to say that they defend, you know, they're defending the Nazi aggression, but people in Ukraine remember the Red Army raping and pillaging and burning their way across this land because they consider Ukrainians subhuman to them. And it's a hard thing as an American, right? We learn mostly about Normandy and us being the good guys and saving the day. That's true to a degree, but it's not the whole history, right? And kind of chipping away at that and beginning to understand a region's history and culture that's so much longer than ours. You know, for them, 1776 is yesterday. Has been real interesting. There's the three of us talking, planning. But you know, here I included this photo here because I think it's really indicative of that time and moment of the war where everyone was pitching in. These were just kind of local welders that by no means were they, you know, men in their 60s and 70s, probably weren't going to do too much direct fighting themselves, but had completely shut down their normal business and were welding these kind of anti-tank things called hedgehogs that the Czechs made famous in their own resistance to the Russians, the Soviets, back in 1968. Just kind of these very basic kind of like pieces of metal that are, you know, crossed like this that you can just toss in the street and will completely mess up a tank tread, right? And you saw this across the country, restaurants making Molotov cocktails, everybody just kind of pitching in, right? And it was that spirit that I think we all remember watching the news back in March 2022 that captivated the world, right? Here was a people willing to fight and die in some cases for you know, these notions that we, I think, take for granted as Americans: freedom, independence, the right to self-determination. It was very real, and kind of being there and being around it was genuinely inspiring. It was so different than what I'd seen and done in Iraq, right? Where, you know, I'd been in rooms where I knew I was not welcome in Iraq for the better part of 15 months, being an occupier with a gun in a living room. This was completely different, and it made me reconsider a lot of my kind of set notions on these big heavy topics, right? And a good reminder to me maybe that a lot of times things depend on circumstances, and not to be an ideologue, not to try subscribe to theory and apply theory to reality. That you know, if you're a thinking person or try to be, it has to be the other way. So came back and saw a lot of the people that we went over there with stay, either as kind of permanent international volunteers. In some cases, some of the people that we'd gotten to know and meet ended up joining Ukrainian military units or the International Legion, right, which is a group of Western military veterans such as ourselves that are fighting for Ukraine. In many cases, these are rough men and women, frankly. They have messy pasts, right? It's not a normal, sane thing to do to upend your life and go over and fight for a different country, right? And I as a person, as a writer, I'm drawn to that, right? There's an ambiguity there that's very human, that kind of, you know, as grateful as I was for that CNN clip, that pushes beyond kind of the headlines of TV good versus evil, right? These are everyday people fighting for democracy. I think most of us probably support, but they're complicated, right? In some cases, maybe running away from something, and that really interested me. And So when we went back, Benjamin Bush, my friend and fellow trainer, came over as a photographer. He's a very skilled photographer as well. And in October, November 2022, we were over there for about 5 weeks, and we kind of traveled the entire country. The focus of the story was the volunteers, right? The volunteers really that had stayed when we'd gone back. We started in Lviv, but then we went over to Kyiv. We drove down to Odessa, which is a very famous kind of beach city that has been getting hit with a lot of cruise missiles. The Russians consider it a Russian city. Catherine the Great helped build it back up 250 years ago. So Putin thinks that, and Putin's worldview, that he makes him think that it belongs to him still. Went over to Mykolaiv, where at the time the front was right here. So you close enough to hear artillery and everything. Met with and spoke to a lot of Ukrainian soldiers that were fighting there at the time. Then we traveled way up here to Kharkiv, which is a city in northeast Ukraine that had really kind of only recently been liberated. And we drove through and met with some of the outlying villages that had been completely destroyed, and interviewed some various people there, and both locals and aid organizations. It was fascinating because that first trip, it was so concentrated at a very specific place and a very specific time with a very specific group. This was a much broader overview of how the war was affecting different people, different places. One example being, this picture here, we found a community group down here in the southern city of Mykolaiv. Older women met every day for 10, 12 hours in a basketball. I don't want to identify this in the story because we didn't want to make it a target, but in like a local basketball gym. And they sewed, they from scratch. They were making gloves for the winter, ghillie suits for the snipers, packaging together care packages of food rations, and doing everything they could to pitch in. Many of these people had maybe sons or son-in-laws serving. Other of them didn't necessarily have a direct connection. This was the way they felt they could contribute to the war. And what was fascinating was down here, and certainly up here in Kharkiv, a lot of these folks were native Russian speakers, came from a generation where they'd grown up under the Soviet Union, maybe even at one point considered themselves Russian, but felt that they'd never been, this was making them Ukrainian, right? I spoke to an older woman up here in Kharkiv. She was in her 80s, and she was trying to learn Ukrainian because the Russians had killed her grandson. He'd been fighting with the border guard, and been one of the very first Ukrainian soldiers at the border trying to defend his country, to give, and helped save it, really, to buy the rest of the country time to organize and mobilize. And they'd had it, and time again, I heard one version of, if we weren't a real country before, we are now. I found that fascinating. Especially being an American, as our country was kind of born, unfortunately, out of bloodshed, right? Out of armed resistance. Here's a picture. I think if two people kind of maybe symbolize our experiences on that second trip, it's these two. On the left, you have William McNulty. He's a Marine veteran who runs an organization called Operation White Stork. They hand deliver to Ukrainian military units IFAKs, which are basically state-of-the-art first aid kits, because the Ukrainian military didn't really have the good things. And something we learned time and time again in Iraq and Afghanistan is how important that those first 30 minutes are, that you get solid medical treatment before you can get them to the actual doctors, right? Training up the medics. I mean, it seems like basic stuff, having kind of the right kind of gauze and dressing right there on every soldier. But that was a very privileged American veteran perspective. This was not the case. Many at the start of the war, most of Ukrainian military units, only the medic had one of these things. So Will and his group really do incredible work, and we kind of followed them around for a few days during this trip. He's meeting with a man named Vitaly Kim, who's the governor of Mykolaiv Oblast, essentially what we refer to as states. So not just the city, but kind of the greater region. He's of Korean descent. And you meet a number of Korean Ukrainians over there because back in the 30s, Stalin exiled a number of Korean dissidents or Korean heritage dissidents from the east regions of the Soviet Empire to Ukraine, right? So it was just kind of a way to, like, you know, in Western media, oh, the Ukrainians are Nazis and they're all white and blonde hair and blue eyed. Reality is always more complicated. And here's an example of this. A leader, a very prominent leader, Putin targeted him personally because he kind of became locally famous for making YouTube videos mocking Putin during the invasion. His headquarters, basically his governor's mansion, was hit by a cruise missile. We walked through the ruins of it. He happened just not to be running late that day and missed it by about 10 minutes.
Oh.
So you know, his son. We spent a night with his son's unit. They were they're basically shooting down drones targeting the city. You know, it was fascinating, right? And one of the soldiers, not Kim's son, but one of his colleagues in that unit that night looked at me because you know, everyday Ukrainians, they're very PR savvy. They know how important it is to be winning the PR battle to continue Western support. And so they hear an American reporter is among their midst, they're going to get their talking points in. And one just looked at me, and because this was right when kind of the idea of Nazi, Ukrainians are all Nazis, was starting to filter in. He goes, I don't understand, like, are you people stupid? You know, talking very bluntly as only maybe a soldier can, an angry soldier can. Our president is a Jew. My governor is Korean. Like, what more do you want? Okay, that's a fair point. Like,
Gee, sounds like Oklahoma.
you know, you got to appreciate the directness of candor like that, right? That's a picture on the far right there. That's when we visited on our way out through Lviv again. We've made it a habit to return to the local cemetery. It's this very kind of old cemetery. A lot of old famous revolutionaries and poets and famous Ukrainian nationalists are buried there. But there's a section of the cemetery that's been marked off for the war dead. It's called the Field of Mars. And every time we go, it's much larger. And it's, I mean, you see families visiting and weeping. You really see what this is doing to a generation of young Ukrainians. And when we visited this time, there were graves waiting to be filled. There was a priest there. You know, there was going to be a service there in the next hour or so. You know, it just a good reminder of the human cost of this. And you know, if I've sought nothing else out from my writing, it's to communicate the human costs and the human suffering of this. This is just kind of a brief glimpse of kind of where we all went. You know, it was a pretty good overview. Lviv, Kyiv, Odessa, Mykolaiv, and over there in Kharkiv. Just to kind of give you a sense of the geometry. It's a gigantic country. It's not as big as Russia, but it's still a very large, massive land. And like America, right? Western Ukrainians are very different than Eastern Ukrainians, or they're very different than the Southern Ukrainians. The one thing they all seem to agree with is that the Northern Ukrainians up here are forest people. You know, you meet soldiers really that had never been to a different part of Ukraine before and are now fighting for it. And there's something really interesting and engaging about that, I think. Our third trip, basically, it took me about that long to convince my wife to let me go back over and check on things, was this past August. And to be honest with you, it was very grim. It's clear that the war no longer has kind of the globe's central attention. The consequences of what's, you know, the somewhat of a stalemate has begun to settle in. The indefiniteness of it is settling in amongst the Ukrainian population. and there's kind of a grim resolve. They're still committed. Like they time and time again, I heard, I'd rather die than live under Russia. But the spirit, kind of the energized spirit that I saw the first two trips had been completely evaporated. As a result, even though I kind of originally pitched a different story, this new story that just came out, as Todd mentioned, I wanted to focus it entirely on these Ukrainians that are bearing this burden. Almost everybody that ended up being featured in the piece was doing something else before the war, and is now an indefinite soldier. This is a picture of that man right there. He's Yarko in the piece. He's an American Air Force veteran from North Carolina, who this is his life now, and he spoke quite eloquently of. He also served in Iraq, and how much more purpose he finds in what he's doing now than what we did in Iraq, and but also how much more difficult it is. You know, the Russians have artillery, right, and more artillery than the Ukrainians do. The drones are a huge factor. We never considered, like, we dominated the sky. That was never a concern in Iraq. We walked around the town, and if anything was coming out of the sky, it was coming from us, right? Completely different. So it's a completely different war. That's Ben, of course, and then the man next to him is he goes by Media in the article. He's a Ukrainian. He's become a friend of ours. We've met with him on each of these trips. And he's just a really fascinating guy. He was working in local government in Lviv when the war started. If you haven't had a chance to read the piece, he's made the mistake of proving himself very capable, so he keeps getting promoted, and he's now a lieutenant in the Ukrainian military. And interviewing him, and watching somebody that I know and respect tremendously, and seeing the darkness that has taken hold of him, because he's had to make decisions that mean life or death. And they're sound military decisions, but oftentimes those decisions cost people. And he's just a person I respect tremendously, and he represents the best of his country, but it's costing. It's costing a lot. Just kind of wanted to put a picture of Nazar, our translator, because we're so reliant on him. He's with us every time we drive anywhere around the country. He is not just our language translator, but our cultural translator, the person I talk to about history with. He's just an instrumental part of the process. I just kind of wanted to include him. He's just kind of, as you can tell, he's just kind of a goofy young man, right? Who should be just kind of. He's a newlywed and has a dog, and he's 24. He should be figuring out his life, but it's like everyone else in this country, his life has been completely upended and dominated. His dad's a colonel in the military. His brother's serving. He has mixed feelings about joining up himself, and I find that very interesting. He works as a translator for various forces, or for various Western groups such as ours, or is kind of his permanent job is he's a translator for a Western organization that is there helping remove bombs and landmines. Ukraine is now like the most heavily landmined country in the world. Here's a picture of a memorial in Kyiv dedicated to the children killed. They put up pictures of every child who's been killed not just since 2022, but since 2014, which is when Russia initially invaded this part of Ukraine and the Far East. When we were there, actually, that's called the Motherland statue, and they had we were there the very day they removed the hammer and sickle from the shield and put up the trident of Ukraine, which was very powerful. On this trip, we pushed farther east. We got to the front. This is not something I cleared with my wife, and we've had some tricky conversations about it since. We went all the way out here to, we were on the outskirts of Bakhmut, which is kind of how I start the story. We met with a very interesting soldier named Valery, who was explaining what was happening in that battle at the time. We spent some time in Dnipro, which is kind of the frontline humanitarian. It was a fascinating city to walk around. It gets cruise missiled constantly because this is kind of the hub of a lot of journalists and humanitarian organizations really have kind of settled in here, because it's about 2 or 3 hours from the front. And just walking around the city, I think I heard about 10 different languages being spoken. English, French, Spanish, Chinese at one point, right? Just kind of all these different people from the West who were trying to help out in some other in various ways. We also went down to Kherson. That section did not end up making the article, so I wanted to talk briefly about it. It had only kind of been liberated by Ukraine a few months prior, and it was also the area that, if you remember, when the dam exploded and flooded the area. And there's great debate. Mostly, at least U.S. intelligence says it was the Russians. The Russians say it was the Ukrainians. So it just kind of completely devastated the city. And you're just seeing all these months later, really just kind of an empty shell of a city, and talking to local residents who are trying one day at a time to literally rebuild. I mean, you saw people on their roofs rebuilding their houses. But it's, you know, I mean, it's grim. It was just grim. It felt like a haunted place. You know, I'm sure we've all different times in our lives been in some place. I remember years ago I went to Belfast, right? And parts of Belfast, you can kind of still feel that. You still feel kind of the ghost of the violence. Kherson was a haunted city. And then on our way out, actually, kind of maybe bringing this full circle, the young man in the article named Fadir. I don't mention this in the article because he was worried about being identified, because he speaks very forthrightly about the front line and kind of the grim circumstances of being sent to the front line with very little training and maybe only a rifle. He was one of our original trainees from the Anderson Cooper piece. You know, a few of them haven't either joined up and volunteered for the military themselves, or in his case, he was drafted. You know, he was a car mechanic that showed up to our training because he wanted to defend his young family. Got drafted, you know, like pretty much any country or society, when they institute a draft, for whatever reason, it tends to be a certain economic, social class where most of those people get pulled from. Like you know, I love Nizar, I do, but Nizar has political connections that this other young man does not. That's exactly what happened in the American Civil War, right? And would happen again if a draft here was ever necessary for something. And he spoke very forthrightly about the bare bone conditions of the front, just hell on earth, fighting in the winter, and how, not in his estimation, and I come from a background where I'm going to trust a frontline soldier, at least for what he's seeing, and how Ukrainian military commanders are failing the soldiers, because there is still kind of a bit of a Soviet mentality in terms of tactics and strategy, but also how the West, we seem to be just giving them just enough weapons to endure, but maybe not enough support to win. And this is a criticism at the time I didn't like hearing, but I think about it, and I think there's something to it, right? We have these kind of masters of the universe types game planning things out, and they're rightfully worried about what a destroyed Russia would look like. At the same time, is Ukraine not an ally? Are they an ally or are they not, right? Are we going to support them or are we not? Do we want to give them the weapons to win or are we not? You know, a very dark theory that was persisted to me a few times this past trip by Ukrainians across the country. Is America willing to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian? And I didn't have an answer for them then, and I'm not sure I have one for them now, but it's something I return to quite a lot, and I brood over. Subjective takeaways. I've already probably interjected some of those over the course of my presentation. The state of the war now is seems to be a bit of a stalemate, and there's this kind of question, if this kind of Machiavellian geopolitical question of have we game planned this too much rather than seizing the advantage and helping these folks win while they could. This is not to say Ukraine is not a complicated, messy, troubled place. It is. Corruption, political corruption is very real. And Zelensky has had to fire many people over the course of the war for this reason. There was a big Time article that came out about 2 months ago that kind of focused on this, that Ukraine is not a NATO-style country democracy just yet, but it's trying to get there. And my opinion, my experience, both on the ground level and interviewing some of the politicians, is that they're trying to grow. They're trying to get there. Putin's strategy, frankly, is pretty obvious. He thinks he can outlast the democratic nations of the West, right? Because we elect new people, our attention drifts to other conflicts, to other problems, and God knows there's plenty of those across the world. But Putin is not wrong to think that one of the benefits of a tyrannical government is they have the time.
They endure.
We will see. My hope, as somebody obviously who cares about this, is that this affects how I vote. This affects what politicians I give my money to, what organizations I give my money to, and as a writer, I try to make a small dent into this by making noise when and where I can. On good days, I have faith that the American people remember that the Ukrainians are fighting for the things that we hold dear, but I'll admit there are days that I don't feel that generosity towards my country and my countrymen, and I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope my country is the America can be the America that Ukrainians think we are. I mean that was such a fascinating thing. Coming out of
They think we are.
They think we are what we say we are. That we are the beacon of freedom. That we are, the city on the hill. That we are, despite all our many failures and mistakes and blunders, that we still are kind of a beacon of freedom and independence. Like all things, there probably is some truth to that. And the fact that they think that suggests there is some truth to that, right? I didn't have, I never had the heart to tell them that we aren't what we claim we are. But maybe maybe if we still are aspiring to be that, right? Like not to get all President Obama on you, but if we are still aspiring for that, is that not itself a marker of hope and possibility? Two organizations that there are many great organizations out there. Oh, what did I do?
Cancel.
There we go.
Software update. Okay.
There are many good organizations out there to support. Two worth checking out. I already talked about Operation White Stork. William McNulty, the Marine veteran. They really do just such really hands-on, incredible work. They're not a giant organization. They're not the Red Cross, but they go out there and deliver it themselves, right? The middleman is all cut out. They have a staff of about 10, and half of that operate out of the warehouse in Poland, and then really just kind of two vans. They crisscross across the country, hand delivering these vital IFACs to Ukrainian military. Most of them are American military veterans, but not all. Some are just deeply invested humanitarians. Another organization that grew out of kind of the 2013 social revolution of Ukraine, known as Maidan, is called Razom for Ukraine, and they are kind of a really great top-level organization that has kind of civilian volunteer groups located across the country that they build tents for the displaced people. They provide food out here in these eastern villages. A lot of these people, it's home. They don't leave. Let's face it, with tornadoes that hit Oklahoma, right? We all know people that don't leave, even when you're told you should. And you know, it's just how it is. It's just, there's a certain streak in humanity that, now this is my home, I'm not leaving. And you see that across Eastern Ukraine. And Razum, though it's based out of New York City, has a ton of local connections. So I'd also recommend checking out that group. And then there's further reading, you know, the 3 Esquire pieces that I've written. I also wrote an op-ed for the Times, kind of geared towards veterans, but just kind of focused maybe on the idea of, if you're going to go over there, make sure you have a reason. Don't just be one of these people that just kind of shows up asking for purpose. Make sure you have purpose before you go. And then I'd be remiss, I also interviewed a great Ukrainian writer turned soldier named Artem Chapai. I think he's brilliant, and he reminds me a ton of George Orwell, which is about the highest compliment I could pay another writer. He's currently living. He was a pacifist before the war. He has deep misgivings about armed violence in general, but he wants to defend his family. Very thoughtful man. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I have a novel coming out in February. Wow. And there will be a reading in Tulsa. That it's fiction, but you know, a lot of these encounters and experiences and ideas that you can't always quote people on, but you can get those emotional truths into fiction in a way that I find fulfilling. So I've talked too much. I apologize for that, but happy to answer any questions or yes.
Did your friend get his in-laws out?
He did. Funny story about that. We did get them out. They came in. These poor people. They stayed with us for 2 nights in Lviv. Her brother, who's now serving in the military, literally drove them out, and because when Bucha, right, that terrible place that was occupied, and the Battle of Kyiv, where all those civilian massacres occurred, were happening in the north of Kyiv. So the brother evacuated through the south and then drove to Lviv. And you just saw these, you know, they're in their 80s, and they were exhausted and potentially leaving their country. You know, they've lived in Ukraine their whole lives. So they flew to Connecticut and stayed with my friend and his wife for about 4 months until they'd had it with suburban Connecticut. And they went back. And it kind of wanted, like, Ukraine is their home. And I mean, they're really fascinating people. The mother is Russian speaking and identified as Russian until this war. The father is kind of a Ukrainian patriot, was a firefighter at Chernobyl back in the 80s, and has dealt with some serious health effects from that. But you know, and these are 2 people, they've kind of argued the politics of this their entire lives, but they love each other. They raised 2 kids together. They live in Kyiv. And you know, it's impossible to reconcile some of these things because, and yet here's a marriage that decided, well, we're not going to reconcile it either. It's just something for us to argue about at dinner every night. I don't know. There's something very human and very true about that, I found. But when I found out suburban Connecticut wasn't for them, I could only laugh because, okay, you know, you got to go. Home is home. I get it. Yes.
I just have a comment. I've given money to Razum before, and they have they did have at the time. I haven't done it in the last few months, but they had a wish list, and they would say things, and you could just go on Amazon and send it over, which was not just money. It was like coats and stuff. So anyway, if you're interested.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic.
Can we get a screenshot of this sent out? Take a picture, somebody.
There's my camera.
I took a picture of it.
Okay.
I can get it.
It's PowerPoint, he can print the slide.
It's public use. I put this together for everybody. Yeah. This picture is at Maidan Square in Kyiv, and they put flags of anyone who's been killed in action. Most of them are soldiers. We found this of Pete Reed, who Marine veteran, went over there and was a combat medic. And was killed in Bakhmut. Wasn't fighting. Was working as a volunteer humanitarian. In his obituary, Ukraine was quoted as Pete helped save dozens of Ukrainian lives, civilian and soldier. And his vehicle was struck by a missile some months ago. But they honor the dead. They honor the dead, which I found impressive.
Do you get comments from Esquire and Time living in Oklahoma and writing about Ukraine?
No, you know, I had a
They consider us the middle of the West, you know.
yeah, you know, so I had a relationship with most of these editors before, which I think helped. But I don't know. I did live in Brooklyn 10 years before. I don't know. I almost think they kind of view it, because you do get those kind of New York people that would never leave New York, and I don't know. Maybe they think I'm more rustic or authentic because I live out there in real America now. I don't know. If they have any kind of sharp commentary, they keep it. They're at least wise enough to keep it to themselves.
What has been the feedback from your latest article? It's only been out a few weeks.
Good, positive, but more subdued than the previous ones, because people are paying less attention. And I'm a minuscule part of that. But I felt it. The number of comments, the way it's shared on social media, just random follow on. Every time a Esquire article came out before, radio or TV journalists wanted to do follow on interviews to talk about it. None of that this time. And I don't take it personally. I don't care. I mean, part of being a writer is you get used to being pouring your heart and soul into something and it being ignored. That's okay. But it did frustrate me because it I think proved to me something I'd already sensed about the waning attention.
And what are the two options?
Great question.
I've read the article.
It's a quote from one of the interviewees. It's victory or death.
Right.
It's victory or death. Yeah.
You did a lot of serious decision making with your wife on the 3 trips that you went.
Yes.
What would take you back to Ukraine?
It's a great question. So, I'll speak very forthrightly. If you can't speak forthrightly at church school, where can you? A rocket went over us, directly over us, at a gas station of all places near Bakhmut. And I was like, nope, I got a family at home. I'm not coming to the front again. I'm not. I don't want to be Hemingway. I don't need to be Hemingway. It was important to go once, I think, to interview these people and see it. I'll go back, and there's certainly risk just being in Lviv or Kyiv or any of the cities, but it would be to interview these. I have weaknesses as a writer, but I do think one of my strengths is I am good at telling other people's stories and taking the specifics of their story and making it interesting to a Western audience. So if my friend Makita, the lieutenant, the civilian turned lieutenant who's proven himself capable, I'd sit down and interview that guy as long as he's willing to have me, and that'll require going to Ukraine right now because men cannot leave. So I'd go to interview it here, but I don't feel the need to go see the trenches again. Because I was like, what am I doing? I'm 40 years old. I have two boys at home. This is too far, and I'm luck of the Irish or somebody up there is looking out for me something, but it landed someplace else. So I found my limit, I suppose.
Well, I'm afraid we have to stop. I got another half hour of questions that I would love to hear people ask.
Do you want to continue next week, or?
We do that. We actually do that all the time.
You know what? My morning was much easier. Sorry, honey, can't help with the kids. Got to go to church school. So anytime I'm happy, or informally, I'm happy to answer whatever questions.
Do you have more questions you'd like to pursue next week?
Yes.
For those of you who would like to come by?
Yeah.
No, I think it gives us time to research the questions. So
Sure. Just do me a favor, and when Annie and the boys get here later today, tell her this was your idea.
This is the front line, and we're
exactly right. Exactly right.
You know how to do that.
Exactly right.
Let's thank Matt. This has been phenomenal. Let's close in prayer. Gracious and loving God, this has been an exceptionally special opportunity. Thank you for Matt and his courage, his incredible gift of sharing people's stories and making things real in a way that the news just doesn't. So help us to be supportive of him, supportive of people everywhere who are in war-torn, confusing, complex situations in life that are being devastated. We ask for a sense of peace, hope, joy, and love, especially during this season. And we ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.